Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this month's edition of the Africa Share and Discuss webinar. My name is Olushola Olateju, the Africa STEM specialist at PhET Interactive Simulation at the University of Colorado Boulder. It's always a pleasure to have you connect with us every month, and today promises to be another insightful session. Thank you for joining us. As always, this edition is going to introduce insights that have been validated by research on the continent that helps us effectively leverage PhET as a tool to improve the teaching and learning of math and science on the continent. I have a couple of my colleagues on the call that will be supporting. I'm sure at some point you would have the chance to connect with them. I am connecting from Lagos, Nigeria today, and it's been very hot today for some reasons, and would love to know where you're connecting from as well. So please write in the chat where you're coming from, when you're connecting from, your name and your country, and perhaps the weather or the temperature in your region at this time. This session is recorded and will be made available after the session for participants or for other members of the community who are unable to join us live. We have our special guest who we're going to introduce shortly, but before then, we're going to go through some housekeeping, and we'll get to introduce the speaker and we'll dive right in. This webinar is brought to you by PhET Interactive Simulations in partnership with the MasterCard Foundation. The PhET Interactive Simulation, for those who are joining us for the first time, is a project at the University of Colorado Boulder that creates free interactive maths and science simulations. PhET teams are based on extensive education research that engage students through intuitive game-like environments where students learn through exploration and discovery. The PhET project was founded in 2002 by the Nobel laureate Carl Wyman. Our goal at PhET is to improve global maths and science education, and we do this in several ways. One of that is the creation of the virtual lab or simulations, like I mentioned earlier on. But another part of it is why we're gathered here today, is through the webinar where we disseminate research-validated insights that would improve our practice as educators, and of course, in turn, impact on the learning and our learning goals and objectives for our students at the end of the day. So we meet here every third Wednesday of the month, where we bring proven educational researchers on the continent to share the outcomes or their recommendations after some research they've carried out. We also have practitioners join us at intervals to share, of course, the experience they've gathered on the field and how that can also help us effectively use PhET as a tool in our classroom. Like I mentioned, the session is recorded, and if you go to our YouTube page, you'd find the recording of this edition and as well as past recordings so that you can catch up or relive some of the experiences and insights shared. And also we encourage that you share with your community and anyone you believe would find this useful in their practice. So we've set a few minutes or time for questions. So while the session is on, we will not be taking questions. We've saved some time to address questions once the speaker is done. But while the presentation is on, we encourage that you please use the chat feature. For those joining us on Facebook, write your questions in the chat on Facebook, or use the question and answer feature here in Zoom. Myself and other members of the team will be looking out and will be answering your questions as they become available. You would also have a chance to speak direct or to share your questions by speaking directly once we get to that point. So if you have a question and you'd like to speak, you'd have a chance to also indicate by raising your virtual hand or just writing into the chat, and we'll be happy to let you write directly. I spoke about so another thing is the community of Facebook. We have a community where, of course, the conversations here extend, and we can then continue to answer questions and provide real-time support. Of course, this session is only going to be on for 1 hour, and there's only so much we are able to cover in that time. So we encourage and I invite you to join the group and connect with other members of the PhET community on the continent, as well as members of the team who will be on hand to answer questions you might have or provide support as required, irrespective of the stage you currently are on your PhET journey. I have the pleasure of welcoming our guest speaker today, who is in the person of Dr. Elizabeth Darko Agyei. She is an academic researcher at the Department of Science Education, University of Cape Coast, Ghana. She attained a PhD in the area of science and technology education, and her research extends into instruction technology in science classroom for the advancement of interactive teaching and development of teaching and learning environment, as well as artifacts that they are contained in. Today, she'll be sharing with us insights for shaping pre-service teachers' uptake of PhET simulations in teaching practices. I'll now hand it over to her. Thank you for joining us, Elizabeth. Welcome to this edition of the Africa Share and Discuss webinar.
Thank you, Salah. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. As Salah said, I'm Elizabeth Darko, Agyei, and today I'll be the one to talk on the topic, developing pre-service teachers' competencies for integrating ICT. My focus will be on sharing insights about how pre-service teachers' competencies could be shaped using certain elements. So just a minute, let me share my slides. Okay. So when we talk about developing teachers' competencies for ICT integration, the question that comes to mind is, why do we need to do that? The more reason why we need to do that is to be able to equip our teachers with the needed ICT-oriented knowledge and skills in a way that facilitates their uptake of technology. But a number of times, the focus has been on technocentric abilities of various technological tools that our teachers are exposed to. But then when we want to develop our teachers' competencies, we want to focus on assisting them to develop an understanding into how to use these technological tools effectively in the teaching and learning processes as informed by theory. And also, we also want to help them understand gain understanding into how their competency could be shaped by certain elements that they could control or could not control where needed. So here in this lecture, I'm going to share with you 5 key elements that shape teachers' uptake of technology in integrating ICT. The first one has to do with ICT. Okay, so in a case where our interest has been on PhET simulation, then our technological tool we want to look at is the PhET simulation. Another element that shapes our uptake of technology as teachers has to do with theory. ICT development frameworks that govern the use of ICT in the classroom. Another element has to do with context where we are talking about the circumstances surrounding how we want to use the technological tool. That is very important. Content too is key, shaping our uptake of technology use in the classroom, because without a content, a technological tool like PhET simulations, you cannot unravel its affordances. So it is very important to be able to know your content. Another one is the exemplary ICT-based intervention, which I call PhET-based intervention. And you will notice that this, as we go on, I get to show you how this particular element is informed by all the other 4 that I've mentioned. So I'm going to take them one by one. So when we talk about ICT or technology informing our way of using it in the classroom, for example, with the PhET, then we say that the PhET itself is able to shape our uptake of technology. And it does that through its affordances, its limitations in representing the subject matter. And how is a teacher going to know this? A teacher will only be able to know the affordances and these limitations or weaknesses that come with various PhET simulation environment if this teacher engages in consistent exploration of the PhET of interest. That is one. Another one is them being able to interact with the content-driven interactive features of the PhET simulations. And then As a teacher, you can't just get up with technology and say, I'm going to use technology in the classroom. There is need for you to prepare comprehensively. But among these 3 strategies that a teacher needs to look out for in his exploits with PhET, the 2 are highly informed by the teacher's content knowledge or knowledge of the subject matter. So without your knowledge of the subject matter, exploring the environment will be difficult. Understanding and getting to know the affordances or limitations will be difficult, because at the end of the day, you want to use this to represent the subject matter. Now, I'm using the bending light simulation and example. So this is a simulation and effect simulation environment that possesses a lot of potentials and brings to the classroom a lot of affordances that the teacher could use to guide his teachers in learning the subject matter on maybe refraction of light. So we see that in this interface, there is a source of light which is supposed to give us a ray. If we click on the ray tab here, that means that when we click on this source of light, whatever should come out should be a ray of light. And if the ray of light is able to come out, then it means that we are able to authentically or get into the real world to get to know that when a ray of light moves from one medium to another, okay, the path of that light changes. And that path, depending on the kind of medium, whether it's dense or less dense, is going to be defined by the media, the refractive index there be with that media. But then as much as the simulation environment is going to help us study or verify the laws of refraction, you will notice that among these interactive interfaces here, the interactive features is, for example, the protractor, for example. I'm picking that one because that's the one that I discovered some weaknesses. So you notice that the protractor is supposed to help a learner or a user to be able to measure the angle of incidence, angle of refraction when exploring this simulation environment. But then if you look at this protractor variable, you will notice that the ruler grid on this protractor is said that it has a maximum calibration up to 90 degrees and then a minimum of 0 for each quarter division of this protractor. But then you will notice that we can take calibration, very clear calibrations within intervals of 30 degrees, 10 degrees, 5 degrees. But then below 5, it becomes difficult because as you can see over here, it's very blurred. So if you were to help your students measure angles beyond 5 degrees, there will be issues because the calibrations are not clear. Now, this could be considered on the part of the teacher as having discovered a weakness in this particular PhET simulation environment. But the discovery of such a weakness is not the end of the road. Doesn't mean that PhET is not good enough. Actually, I call it an advantage to your use of what PhET. So being able to discover this weakness tells you that as a teacher, you have to think about how you can go around this weakness and then fall on the affordances, the good side, the potentials, using the future to design lessons such that your students don't get to witness these weaknesses, but then it's still able to help them represent the subject matter. So what am I saying? I'm saying that our discovery of the affordances of a PhET simulation environment, okay, is one of the things that help us to identify the kind of inquiry we want to adopt with a simulation. Is it going to be exploration? Is it going to be demonstrative? Either one we want to choose, we have to be sensitive to the context in which we want to use it. Also, if we are able to discover the affordance, it's able to tell us what kind of learning objective to set. So if I have identified the affordance, and like in this case, it's able to help me represent the concept of refraction of light, verifying Snell's law and all that, that is an advantage. That is a good side of the PhET. So it's helping me define my objectives. It's also able to help me develop and design interactive learning artifacts that are content specific and also afford students to learn meaningfully. And you will agree with me that at the end of the day, looking at the uncooked nature of the PhET simulation, at the end of the day, the teacher is forced to be a facilitator in the classroom. But then when we discover the weaknesses, normally the inherent weaknesses based are weaknesses that as teachers, we are not able to resolve. It takes the able competencies of the developers of the PhET to be able to resolve that. And that is what research does. With research, we are able to help the developers identify these weaknesses and what? Resolve them. But then as a teacher, it doesn't mean that I have identified a weakness, so that's the end. When you identify the weakness, you need to think about how you can use the affordances to overshadow the weakness. So if the protractor feature of the bending light simulation, for example, is not working the way I want to, what can I do? I will want to come up with an activity whereby I set the angles of incidence or the angles of refraction at intervals of 30 or at intervals of 10 or at intervals of 5, where the protractor can very well calibrate it. Now, another element that shapes our integration of PhET is the theory. Theory shapes our use of PhET in our teaching and learning by one, defining the kind of ICT-oriented pedagogies we could consider in using it, and also governing the kind of knowledge we require to be able to take it up in our teaching and learning process. So when we talk about theory that shapes a teacher's integration of PhET, and the kind of theory that is able to help them define a kind of pedagogy to use, one of them is the 5 dimensions for meaningful learning with ICT. So this is a framework that talks about the fact that if you want to use ICT, then you might as well want to use it in a way that brings about meaningful learning. What do they mean by meaningful learning? So this is a model by Holland and et al., where they talk about 5 attributes of meaningful learning: the active, the intentional, the constructive, the authentic, and what? The cooperative. That when we are able to use technology in a way that our learners are active, constructive, intentional, and get to experience a real world context, then we can say that we can achieve meaningful learning with ICT. So in a study where I sought to examine the effectiveness of simulation-based lessons in improving teaching, this model, for example, was used as a lens in defining a kind of ICT-oriented pedagogy, which I call interactive teaching. And based on this model, we define it to be a learner-centered method with teachers creating various avenues and structures that are ICT-oriented in ways that stimulate learners to be, one, active, constructive, authentic, intentional, but most importantly, in a constructivist teaching and learning environment. So in this paper or in this research, what I did was to train or engage 8 pre-service teachers in a professional development arrangement, wherein they were equipped with ICT-based competencies that allows them to particularly use PhET simulations in the classroom. So in their design of the lessons in this study, I wanted to find out how effective these lessons that are PhET-based brings about interactive teaching, improves teaching and learning. And then in this study, 4 simulations were used: the Hooke's law simulation, the bending light simulation, the build an atom simulation environment, and the Hooke's law. And in this study, it turns out that yes, the lessons were effective. The PhET-based lessons were effective because the teacher's teaching had improved to be interactive and learner-centered. But most importantly, it was the theory, the 5 dimensions, their ability to realize the 5 dimensions for meaningful learning in their design is what brought about the improvement. So here, theory had informed their way of using the technological tool. And instead, we also found out that it's not just about, in this model, realizing the active, constructive, and the 5 attributes in isolation, but then it is the synergetic effect, the combined effects in an instructional process that brings about what? Interactivity. And most importantly, the cooperative dimension of this model, this theory, is what sustains all the other dimensions. So what is that for it? It means that as teachers, if we are able to identify theory that governs our way of teaching, then with PhET, it becomes very easy for us to really realize what improvement in our teaching. Now, another way theory shapes a teacher's uptake of the facts is its ability to govern the kind of knowledge a teacher would require. If you want to use technology in the classroom, you require some kind of knowledge, and that is what theory does. Theory is able to help you identify that kind of knowledge you need. And in this case, an example of such framework is the PhET framework by Meshra and Kopler, which says that at the heart of these authors propose that at the heart of every good teaching are three core elements: contents, pedagogy, and technology. But then most importantly, the interrelationship among and between these knowledge bases is key. So what are they saying? They are saying that a successful teacher in the classroom who wants to use technology is one who has the capacity and ability to draw from his pedagogical knowledge, his content knowledge, and technological knowledge. And most importantly, be able to establish a relationship between them. Now, how do we realize a teacher's knowledge? Most of the time, with a PhET framework, for every teacher that uses technology in the classroom, in the design and implementation of his lessons, you are able to identify the level of his knowledge or his PhET in the lessons he has designed and the lessons he has implemented. Now, context is also another element that shapes a teacher's integration of facts or technology. Okay, so when it comes to technology integration, then our interest lies in the context in which the instructional process is to occur with a technological tool. Context can be taken from different angles. At three levels, we can look at context at a macro level, a meso level, and what? A micro level. So where we talk about a macro level, which has to do with, we can talk about national policies informing our way of using technology in the classroom, the social aspect and all that. We can talk about the meso, where our use of technology in the classroom is informed by conditions that come with the school and the administrative processes in the school. And at the macro level, which is where I like so much, is a level where we are able to look at it from our classroom scenarios, our respective classroom situations. So in your classroom, what is the context in your classroom? At the national level, what kind of policies are informing you? That is at the micro level. So when we are able to define or get to know our context, context is what shapes our integration with faith by defining how a selected first simulation is to be used. So your context will tell you whether to use it online or offline. Your context is also able to tell you what kind of teaching strategy to adopt. If you know you don't have computer, for example, in your classroom, of course, your context cannot be a place where your students get to explore one-on-one with the computer or the PhET simulation environment. You might want to look out for another strategy that will fit your context. Context too is able to tell the teacher about the classroom situation to consider in designing what his lesson artifact. So we are saying that to use PhET effectively, there is always the need for a teacher to understand his or her specific context. So you want to use PhET, what is in context? The other elements is the content. And when we talk about content, we are looking at you as a teacher having a sufficient content knowledge in a way that promotes his teaching with effects. So with your sufficient content knowledge, you are able to discover the affordances or limitations of the PhET in representing the subject matter. And then when a teacher masters his content knowledge, it becomes easier to explore the simulation environment, to unravel its affordances and potentials, and to use it effectively. The last element is the exemplary PhET-based intervention, which when we are able to, teachers are exposed to, it becomes an element or a building block for shaping their uptake of the PhET. So you notice that throughout all the four elements I've talked about, the content, the context, the ICT itself, and then the context, they all inform the design of an exemplary ICT or PhET-based intervention. And how do they do that? Okay, so to design such an intervention, There is need for a consideration of the ICT itself. There is need for a consideration of a kind of context you want to use the PhET. There is need for theory to inform the way you want to use it and also to govern the kind of knowledge you want to be exhibited in your lessons. And most importantly, the content knowledge. But then these exemplary materials, they shape a teacher's use of PhET by providing practical and authentic samples for teachers to help them gain understanding into what a PhET-based innovation looks like. Normally the question is, how does a PhET-based intervention or lesson look like? That is what an exemplary intervention does. It gives you examples of what you are up for. But then as much as it is good, the tendency is that for teachers, when they are exposed to these exemplary interventions, they are tempted, the tendency for them to replicate and not really bring out their creativity is very high. So at the end of the day, they end up not being creative in the design, but then that is not the end of it. It means that if we are exposing our teachers to innovations that are PhET-based, then we might as well consider measures that will ensure them to gain understanding into the design process in light of theory. If they do understand the design process, there is no need for them to replicate. They will now apply what they have learned. So here in a study that I conducted, what I did in this research article, where I looked promoting interactivity, where I looked at the realities in the Ghanaian classroom, the study sought to determine what kind of intervention can fit the Ghanaian classroom context. What are the futures that should go into such an innovation? So in this study, through systematic review, we found out that intervention, a PhET-based intervention, that is one, readily available, sustainable, context and content specific teaching, ICT teaching and learning environment. And you'll notice that this is a trademark or the hallmark of PhET simulations. Readily available, is sustainable, is context and content specific, and that it can be used offline. And then the next point was an ICT-oriented knowledge base. So there is need for such an intervention, there is need for an ICT knowledge base. It means that there should be a kind of knowledge the teacher should apply to be able to design such a lesson. And there should be a framework to help him define the kind of pedagogy he or she wants to use in the design of his lessons. So the study we also found out that ICT-driven interactive learning objective is also another future of such an intervention. One of the things about PhET is without goals, without objectives, without interactive objectives, you lead your students astray. You leave them enjoying the interactive interface without really learning with it. So there is need to set objectives for that. Another future has to do with an inquiry-driven activity, ICT-based learning material. In other words, an activity sheet that is ICT-based, that is PhET-based, that is going to guide your student throughout the instructional process in realizing the lesson goals. And then a collaborative classroom arrangement. One of the findings of this study was the fact that when students are made in the use of PhET, when students are made to work collaboratively, it really enhances their learning meaningfully. So a future of this intervention should be a teacher designing an intervention and bringing on board a kind of collaborating element where it provides platform for students to share their ideas and then express their knowledge divergently. So these were the futures that fitted for the Ghanaian context, but it doesn't mean that is all. This can be adapted in other countries based on what their context and their specific situations. So in this lecture, we've looked at 5 elements that could help us shape our use of PhET. The PhET itself, theory, content, context, and then an exemplary intervention. But the question is, all these that I have said, what does it mean for us as teachers? What does it mean for practice and prospective teachers? What it means is that if we want to use the PhET, then first of all, as teachers, we have to be ready to engage in an extensive exploration of these things, because this is crucial for us developing the technology knowledge of this particular ICT tool. We also have to be ready to adapt teaching practices that are informed by theory, not just any teaching practice, and also define explicitly the kind of context in which we want to use the PhET. Other than that, we will not be able to really use it effectively, because context does matter. And then there is need for us as teachers to also sufficiently develop our content knowledge in relation to whatever teaching subject we find ourselves, whether maths, whether physics, biology, chemistry. And then if we are exposed, we are privileged to be exposed to any exemplary PhET-based innovation or intervention, then we should be careful to use it as a guide to inform our design process. But for the school leader, it means that we need to consider professional development arrangement that has focus on providing platform, collaborative and activity-based platforms for them to facilitate the shaping of the teacher's use of the PhETs, taking into consideration these elements. At this point, I think that, Shala, my presentation has come to an end, and then I would like to end. Thank you very much for being with me. Thank you. I'm not hearing you.
Oh, sorry, I was muted all the while. Interesting.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so I said, thank you for such an amazing presentation. I was just reiterating some of the points you mentioned around key elements to consider around the integration of technology, especially when it comes to teacher development. You did mention ICT, and in this case, which is PhET, and then considerations along the lines of context, content, and theory, as well as the exemplar resources. I have a question along the lines of exemplar resources before I then open the floor to the house to ask questions. From your experience, how do we effectively support teachers? So it's twofold. So we've seen cases or scenarios in which teachers leverage exemplar resources as guides to develop capacity to be able to recreate same or adapt that to then recreate something similar in their own context. But there are scenarios also in which, just like you rightly mentioned, teachers basically rely on what has been created and are not motivated to basically innovate or adapt that to create what is relevant or useful in their class. Or in another case, they do not develop the competence or capacity to be able to recreate same. How, in your experience, have you seen, how can we support teachers who might need a bit more time to attain that degree of competence or confidence to be able to recreate same, where they do not rely on that, what has been created?
Okay, thank you, Sola. So one of the things that I normally do that I think works is engaging them in some kind of professional development arrangement whereby I take them through the process of unraveling the potentials of the simulation environment or technological tool, the process of doing it in relation to their contents, the process of also coming together and trying to figure out for as many potentials that they are able to discover with the PhETs. What can I do with it? So it's like a step-by-step process where you take them through the theory, the contents, the context, explain the various avenues, discussions where they get to discuss among themselves, what could be available in their specific scenarios in their various schools. And then when it comes to the technological tool, they get to discuss, okay, so what can it do? And what did I find that is not in line with what I'm expected to teach? So at the end of the day, I realized that it's about taking them through the elements one by one and helping them know how to go about it. So how do I get to understand my context? How do I get to master my content, my subject matter? How do I get to use these facts, unravel the affordances, the limitations? So it's like engaging them throughout. And this has to be activity-based, where they get to understand what they are doing and then what kind of knowledge they need to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I was going to speak to the 5 dimensions you mentioned also for meaningful learning around those lines. But I will open the floor now to the house. If we have time at the end of the session, I'll just come to that so that we can, because I think that's a very useful framework as well that teachers can consider when integrating ICT. So we'll come to that further down the line. This is a good time for those who have questions. Please, you can use the question and answer feature here in Zoom. You can write in the chat, and I will be happy to read. Myself and Zach will be happy to read and have Dr. Elizabeth answer your questions. You can also raise your virtual hand by using the raise hand feature within Zoom. If you look at the lower part of your screen, if you're on mobile or PC, you see the hand raised feature. You can indicate and we'll give you the permission to speak. We'll grant you, of course, rights to speak, and you'll be able to ask your questions directly. Zach, I don't know, do you see questions in the chat? Would you like to help take that while we wait for anyone who also wants to speak at some point? Hi, Zach, are you there? Oh, okay, just a minute. I will give you permission, right? So you should. Okay, while we wait for Zach, I'll just look through the chat and we'll get started. Okay, welcome, Zach. So looking at the question and answer, the first question, Dr. Elizabeth, is from Professor Overson Shumba. Would this apply to pre-secondary, secondary, or tertiary, as in that case, post-secondary learning situation? So some of the framework, but of course, the examples you've given, at what grade level does this apply across board, or in what particular context or level?
Please, can you come again? I didn't really get the question very well. So
the question is, would this apply to pre-secondary, secondary, or tertiary learning situations? I'm not sure. Okay. Oh, okay.
Yes. Oh, and that is where context becomes very important. So it applies to pre-tertiary, tertiary, and even beyond. It depends on what you have available and what you want to do.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question, I'm not sure if this is a question, but we'll get to that, is from Chikoye. It says the research has proven that indeed ICT, specifically PhET, improves learners' comprehension of concepts when it is this good to be, or alpha comprehension of concept. I think this is the question. When is this going to be, or how far has the government gone in inculcating this as policy to use in education? I think that's the question. I think that's kind of beyond the scope of what, I don't know. Do you want to give that a shot in your experience? What have you seen the government?
Okay, actually, in my experience, I've not really, on my part, it's not, the PhET have not really been a national thing. It's not a national thing. It has been my introduction of it to the teachers I train in my institution. But the government is interested in helping or developing teachers' competencies in using ICT. So I think that going ahead is just a matter of time. It will come to that.
Okay, great. My feedback to that also would be, please do not assume that they are aware that PhET exists, you'd be surprised that as educators, we're in the know, but as education leaders or people not in education, but of course are in policy making and all of that, they might not have interacted with PhET. So advocacy from us as educators also is a good way to get started. Once you have a chance to share the conversation, ensure you introduce or let them know this particular tool exists, and you know it can help address concerns and then help guide them through what is possible. In certain cases as well, if you're able to onboard or introduce teachers within your community or within your network, that's also a very good place to start. I think we all have roles to play.
That is something I'm working on.
Exactly. We all have roles to play, both at the government, but also at individual levels, to all get on deck and then contribute to improving the teaching and learning of math and science on the continent. I'll do the second question. I hope this is a question. I think this is asked. Are higher education institutions being involved so that the Faculty of Education designs a course curriculum specifically for use and the development of PhET simulations for teacher students, so that after they graduate, they develop and use PhET simulation effectively and efficiently? So I think you can speak to this. Since my understanding of the question is, and this is also a consideration at some point, that if we are able to integrate PhET sims into the pipeline or into the pre-service teacher education programs, that can get ingrained, and teachers, there's a greater chance or likelihood that teachers would find use for that in their classrooms once they go into use. So the question is, are there opportunities at teacher training institutions? I hope I'm interpreting your question right, Chico. If I'm not, please feel free to write or just raise your virtual hand and we'll be happy to let you ask directly. But are there opportunities within teacher training institutions to get teachers onboarded right at the point where they are being prepared before they come into full service and they are perhaps inundated with an array of technologies that they have to get on or just get comfortable with? What are your ideas or thoughts along those lines?
Okay, I think that there are opportunities in the sense that at the university level where teachers are trained to be teachers and they are to be released later on to practice their profession as teachers. Example, in my institution, there is this course that has been introduced, which we call the computer applications in science education. So such a course is a course that provides the opportunity for teachers to get to learn and develop competencies in using technology in their instructional process. So just from before they get out of their training as teachers and go out there as professional teachers, they are exposed to such a course, which provides the platform and opportunity for them to learn about how to use technology. And so one of the things that could be done in various institutions that are not maybe in my institution, what I do is I use it as an opportunity to expose them to diverse technological tools, of which PhET is one of them. So other institutions could also adopt specific technological tools where they expose these teachers to how to use it in the classroom, so that at the end of the day, as part of their training, when they get out there, at least they have an idea and the know-how of how to integrate technological tools into teaching. And I'm not talking about learning IT. Normally it's misconstrued for learning IT. No, really learning how to use technology in instruction. That is key. So there is such an opportunity.
Okay, great. Thank you for those feedbacks. A few more questions. Please remember, if you have questions, please feel free to raise your virtual hand or use the question and answer feature. Zach, please, if you can, I would expect that our audience in Facebook joining through Facebook also might have questions. If you find any, please feel free to unmute and ask directly. This is a question from Rose Mutende. Zach, I think this is directed at Zach. I want to introduce my science teacher education undergraduate students to the use of PhET sims. Can I freely use the sims? Okay, yes, you can. Please, you can get in touch with the PhET team or write to PhET-global at colorado.edu. We'll be happy to work with you, of course, to co-design the training activity and onboard teachers within your school. Okay, Zach already responded. That's great. I see another question. How can you integrate ICT in large classrooms where computer gadgets are less in schools? I don't know if you can speak. These are kind of.
Yes, I can.
Okay, great.
Okay, so yes, that is something that is typical of a number of developing countries where we don't have the internet access. So you can use it, but then that is your context. So one of the strategies you would want to adopt is adopting a demonstrative kind of form of inquiry where you, the teacher alone, might have access to the computer, and then you come up with ways in which you, of course, the good side of it is the fact that we are able to use it offline. So it means that the teacher will have to download it off and use it offline on his computer, and then adopt a demonstrative kind of inquiry where only you have access to the computer, but you find a way to demonstrate using the computer how whatever subject matter you are teaching, how the PhET could be used to represent it. I don't know if that answers your question.
I believe so. So I'll move on to the next one. This is coming from Ghana, so I'll assume you understand the context or the country. So the question is, what in your view could be the approach at policy level for the use of PhET simulations in Ghana? So how can we approach, what in your view could be the approach at policy level for the use of PhET simulation in Ghana? At policy level, how can we get PhET sim integrated into and become mainstay or become a tool for teaching in Ghana?
Okay, I think that one of the things we could consider in coming up with ICT development, ICT integration policies in the country would be to consider technological tools like the PhET. But at that level, it means that we will have to find a way to help the ministry or the policymakers at that level to really understand what the PhET is about, what is in for the teacher, and what is going to be for the nation as a whole. But then the first step will be taking it to their doorstep and finding a way to help them understand what PhET is, when PhET is brought to board, what is bringing to us and how useful it's going to be to our classroom. Then if they're able to understand at that level, then now we can think about how we can bring it on board in our further policy documents and implementation process, how we can do it. But the first step will be taking it to their doorstep and helping them to know what PhET is, what it can do, and in our context, how it can be used.
Okay, great. This is another one from Mary Ann Good. Are PhET sims, I think this is similar to what Richard asked, are PhET sims being integrated into, okay, different, are PhET sims being integrated into the teaching of science content or in pedagogical courses? I'm not sure if I understand. Okay.
PhET is being used in teaching science content. Okay, the whole idea of using PhET is using it to represent the subject matter. I think that is the main goal. But then in our attempt or in the process of using the PhET to represent the subject matter, to teach science content or mathematics content, or whatever it is we are using it to teach, we need to also consider a kind of pedagogy that could fit our use of the PhET, and that is where pedagogy comes in. But then PhET, most importantly, is for representing the subject matter, teaching the context. When we lose that essence of the PhET, then there is no use, because it is for that. And that is why its features or its interactive feature is content specific. So it means that at the end of the day, it's a targeted simulation environment which looks at content specific issues. Okay.
Okay, great. I see that Mwale has his hand raised. If you're still there, you should be able to unmute and ask your question directly now. Are you there, Mwale? You have permission to ask, you have permission to unmute and ask question now. While we're waiting for him, because of our time, while we're waiting, I'll just read a few more questions we have here. Hopefully we're able to hear his question. So we can take all the questions we have before we end today's session. So one limitation, the PhET team is so the PhET is interesting and very interactive, I must admit. Content knowledge makes it easier. This is just a remark. How far should science teachers go in using PhET simulation? Is it good enough to replace real life experiences?
Okay, PhET it depends on your context, but I think that in my experience, PhET does not take out the real life experience. It's more like supplementing, okay, especially where we teach topics that are contents that are abstract contents or topics in science, where in countries where we are not able to have the sophisticated labs where we are able to demonstrate these science contents, then PhET, which is a virtual experiment, could be very useful in helping us do that. But then it's not totally coming to replace the natural experience or the hands-on experience where we have in the laboratory. No, it's about supplementing. But at the end of the day, it still behoves on the teacher to be able to decide at what point do I use the PhET? Am I going to use it to supplement or to reinforce laboratory activities, or am I going to use it to supplement the content that I've taught before, just to help students understand what I taught them in abstraction? So it's not taking out what we do, but it's rather helping out, supplementing our teaching and learning process.
Okay, great, thank you. I think I should just add briefly, like if you consider context or what you find prevalent across the continent, the actual labs are non-existent, or they are not functioning properly, even in areas where they exist. So this is it, so that basically it helps address or blocks that gap. And as in, that's like a big challenge, and this fits in cases where they do not exist. This can help students begin to achieve that practical or inquiry, having that experience that otherwise would not have had without that. But even beyond that, think of other opportunities as visualizing rather abstract or microscientific concept. In this case, you are able to see electrons move, where a teacher would have to explain or just have other ways. So while it is not replacing, it's a complementary, it's a tool that complements, or that you can find ways to effectively use to complement your effort, either to reduce costs so that you're not depleting reagents or any other materials. So there are different opportunities that this addresses, and like you rightly said, just finding the right context to meet your need would be a good start. There's an interesting question here, which I think would like, if that's the last we take, that would be good. It is, just a minute, Doctor, I would like you to explain, when implementing the steps you have given us, how can we utilize PhET sims to teach a specific aspect, content concept, and when do you apply it to teaching experiments?
Okay, so you can use the PhET, for example, to maybe reinforce a concept you have taught before, and then you are trying to help your student fill in the knowledge gaps. You can also use the PhET at a point where you have taught the whole lesson, but then at the end of the day, you want them to have an authentic experience of what you actually taught them. So, and also there are times there are certain contents that over the years, or your students throughout their learning process, they have never really get to have a real life experience of that. Example is the atom that Sola was rightly talking about. An atom, normally we draw circles on the board and all that, but then as to how an atom looks like, how the protons look like, how the neutrons look like, the student might not be able to see that. in abstraction. So at that point, having taught them the theoretical aspects of an atom, the structure and all that, it will be a good time to take it up once again and try to use the PhET to help them understand and show them, okay, this is what I was talking about. This is how it looks like. This is how it looks like. But then with the experimental aspects, okay, it depends. If you are in a school where you have a very good resource lab, okay, then it can go hand in hand, where as much as they are doing the practical thing, that's if they have computers in there, of course, then you can use the PhET to kind of, even before they start the experiment, show them what kind of experiment they are going to do. For example, the glass block experiment in physics, where we use the glass block and students are able to use it to verify Snell's law, where we use pins and all that. The bending light simulation environment could be a starting point, where before they even go into using the in doing the glass block experiment, you get to show them how it looked like. So the ray of light moving from one medium with a glass block, it means that the light is going to move from an air medium into a glass medium. And we have a simulation whereby we can mimic that process. So you use the simulation, maybe even before they start the experimental process, to get a feel of what they are going to do and also understand what they are going to do. So someone can also say that I'll let them do it, and at the same time be going along with the virtual experiment. At the end of the day, it's about your context, what will be good for your students, and most importantly, your learning, your students' needs. What is it they can do? What is available in your lab? What can you do? It all goes back to the teacher. Okay.
Okay, great question. We're almost at time, so yes. I unfortunately would only be able to take one particular question, which I would just take the opportunity to. Where is this? Someone said something about if I just a minute, apologies. We love to respect your time. What training? Yeah, so the question is from Gavin. What training criteria is being put up for the creation of the SIM to suit our African context? Courses are made to believe that most of the SIMs are made for. Unfortunately, I think the science is universal and is not based like what's it called? Gravity is the same across the world. If you jump from a particular height, you definitely find yourself on the floor. So while there might be some variation in terms of use and adaptation within countries, the science itself is pretty much standard. The curriculum might be different in terms of what is being taught or the objective the country seeks to achieve. That's where you see the difference. But in terms of being able to teach atoms or all of what the SIMs represent, there's really no variation in that regard. What we encourage is for you to explore and find SIMs that align, or of course, make the best use of the concept that is being taught, and then of course, create activities that emphasizes some of the adaptations that you would love to see. But I would also love to add here, like there are a lot of effort, like we've done at the moment, there are more African languages are being supported, over 10, you'd find up to like 17 African languages, so PhET SIMs are available in up to 17. At the moment, about maybe over 5 of them, all SIMs, you can access all of the SIMs. Some of them are not all. The efforts are ongoing to complete that. We'd also begin to see a lot of culturalization, or of course, characters that look a lot more relevant or in line with the context in Africa. I wanted to share this as well, which I thought was kind of aligned to the question as we close. So if you visit our website, which is, of course, phet.colorado.edu, phet.colorado.edu, at the top menu, you'd see the teaching tab, and just at the end, there's the virtual workshop. So the virtual workshop basically introduces you to some of the methods and designing activities, many of the things we've discussed here. You can take the course at your pace, but we can also collaborate and have co-facilitated session where we bring it perhaps to your district or your school. But once you get in touch, we can find the best ways to support you to implement that in your school, or maybe bring it to your district, just like I mentioned. So I just thought I should mention this because this addresses many of the questions we have in the chat. Apologies, we would have to draw the curtain here. If we're unable to get to your questions, we are so sorry. Would encourage that you perhaps take the questions to the Facebook group, where, of course, the members of the team and other members of the community are able to respond and give you support as needed. I would like to give Dr. Elizabeth a chance to just give our final words as we close, so that we apologize again. We're like 2 minutes past the mark. We love to respect your time. It's not in our,
Okay.
yeah, please go ahead. Just final words as we close.
Okay, so what I would like to say to our teachers is that the use of PhET requires that you get out of your comfort zone as teachers. It takes your creativity to be able to design very effective lessons for the PhET. So my advice would be, if we want to go this way with the PhET, then we should be ready to explore it. We should be ready to master our content knowledge. We should be ready to not to rely on the fact that, oh, I don't have internet, I don't have computers and all that. The question is, what do you have? And what can you do with what you have in your context? That is always what we miss as teachers. So you need to get out of your comfort zone and think about how you can go around what you consider as barriers to your use of technology in the classroom. On this note, I'd like to thank you all. Thank you. So I'm done. I think I'm.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Elizabeth. Thanks everyone for joining this edition. Please, if you have questions, please feel free to connect with Dr. Elizabeth both on LinkedIn or which out. If you can post your email as well, that would be helpful. But you can find her online at different points, and of course she'll be happy to continue the conversation as well. Thank you so much for joining this edition. See you again next month. Bye for now.
Bye.